Гроз 17, розсвіт, пещ, 9, добрачнішні, возвращение на родину, 1, грузовий вагон. Ви готові, купченник солдата?
Готовий. Соблюдать.
Welcome back to another prop tutorial. Today we're going to be making Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier's Trigger Word Journal. Let's get started. To start off, you're going to need a 14-inch wide by 10-inch high rectangular piece of veg tan leather. I didn't have a full piece large enough, so I ended up stitching 2 pieces of craft store leather together. It will create a bit of a seam line, but it will be in the back of the journal and end up looking like a piece of the spine in the end. For stitching the leather, you're going to need a size 90 or 100 needle with a wide stitch setting on a machine. Any lower than this needle size will break the needle and possibly damage your machine. In a sink or basin filled with warm water, submerge the entire piece of leather. Water tenderizes leather and makes it more malleable. This will allow you to form it around anything you like. Keep it in around the form you want, and allowing the leather to dry will make it mold to any shape. To start molding the spine, I'm using the side of my drafting table to mold a crease line. Press firmly on the top and side of the leather pieces to ease a shape into the leather. Flipping it to the inside, I begin to mold the front spine crease a little more and use clamps to secure my shape into place. I set the leather aside to cure up a bit and move on to the pages of the journal. Taking the same 10 by 14 inch measurements of the leather, I'm making a custom text block out of sketchpad paper. Gently form what is known as a signature by creasing the paper in half. If you own a bone folder, this will help the crease along, but I'm using a back end of my leather tool, which worked for me. I'll have to trim down the height of the pages, which I'll do shortly. I form at least 2 crease signatures at a time and place them on top of the rest. Any more than 2 or 3 pieces of paper stacked up will make it harder for a needle to pass through later on. Since my pages are about an inch too high, I'm using a very sharp Exacto knife and a metal ruler to trim down the excess. Remember kids, please be careful when using sharp blades. Once the pages are trimmed, take a pencil and mark at least 5 to 6 dots 2 inches apart. To keep my pages in place, I'm using purse clips. Bring the markings on the top signature down the spine to give you a guide to where the seam holes will go. From these markings, pierce a small hole in the middle of the crease with your needle, or a very small hole punch. Taking a needle with dark red thread that has been double knotted at the end, thread through the first hole in the top signature. Flip the signature around and go through the next hole. Repeat this process to the end. Once at the end on the outer side, bring it back through the last hole and stitch in the opposite direction. At the very end, make a loop under the thread and create a knot. Send your needle back through the top hole and gently pull the knot to the other side. From there, take the next signature and thread through the first hole. Pull the needle through and send it through the second hole. From the outer side, thread your needle under the right side of the hole directly below this one, and then up through the left side, creating a loop to knot off. Pull the thread back through the same hole and move on to the next, repeating the process until the end of this signature. The third signature will start the process for the rest of the pages of your book. Once again, thread through the first hole, gently pulling taut, and down through the second hole. This time, send your needle through the knot you created with the second signature. Pull the needle through the knot and then back up through the same hole it came out of. Repeat this process until the end of the page and use this same method for the rest of your signatures. The number of pages is up to you. I have 50 pages in my journal, but that was all the paper I had on hand. You can put as many as you like, but you'll have to adjust the size of your spine accordingly. Once all of your signatures have been sewn and you reach the end, create a loop and knot your thread. Send your needle through the last hole and gently pull the knot through. Once completed, your text block spine should resemble this. This is what's known as kettle binding. Next, take a piece of cardboard the width and length of the spine, and with PVA glue, attach it to the text block. Make sure the placement of the block on the board is good. Clip the pages together with a clamp and set it aside to dry. Now let's get back to the leather. Use a damp cloth to wet the front of the book. Using a leather spoon tool and a ruler, I'm further indenting the spine by tooling the leather. Tooling leather is just making impressions in the leather. Dampening the leather creates deeper lines for finer tooling. In Photoshop, I set the measurements of my book into a new file and resized a star shape for placement on the front cover. I cut the star out and use it as a guide to lightly pencil sketch in the outline. Wetting the leather again, and with the same leather spoon, I begin to indent the star. I press firmly on the tool to flatten the leather. I'm careful to stay in my pencil markings. If you slip, you'll have an unsightly gash where there shouldn't be one. And even though we'll be dinging this cover up in a few, you'll want the star shape to stay intact. Since there's excess leather in the back due to the spine shaping, I take my sharpened Exacto knife and ruler again to trim it. To make this cover look as if it's been in the darkest hydra depths, I'm taking a sanding block and roughing the edges up. I also curve the edges of the book by sanding them. Furthering the wear and tear, I'm making wrinkles in the leather by folding it onto itself and generally bunching it up. I do this while it's still damp from the tooling. Don't worry about warping it. It will flatten back out immediately by putting a large book on top of it for a few minutes. I also take my leather tool and make random indents all over the entire cover, front and back. For the dye, I'm using Fiebing's leather dye in red mixed with the tiniest bit of black for a custom darker red. I usually use a wool dabber for clean, even dye jobs, but since I want to keep the theme of old and worn, I'm applying the dye with a foam brush. Typically you brush the dye into the leather in one direction, but since this doesn't need to be a clean dye job, I'm not too worried about it. Flip the cover around and dye the inside as well. Taking a fine detailing brush and more Fiebing's leather dye, now in black, I carefully fill in the star. This will take a steady hand and make sure to blot off any excess dye on your brush to avoid dye bleeding. To me, the star on the book and the film appears to have a worn down silver on it. Now, it might just be me, but I like that idea. So I'm taking some Angelus Silver Leather paint and lightly dabbing on a thin coat. You can go back over this with the black dye to tone it down too. With black acrylic paint, I dry brush on some darkened areas of the book. The last step in the dye job is to seal it. I'm using Tandy Leather's clear gloss finisher and applying it in a buffing motion with a towel. After this is dry, you can take a terry cloth and buff the leather to a nice shine. After your leather is fully dried, now it's time to attach the text block. Off camera, I applied some rubber cement to the inside of the leather spine and the cardboard spine of the text block. Pressing firmly, hold it in place for about a minute. To flatten the book out completely, I place a towel on top with a large book and some weights. I'll leave it like this for at least an hour or two. The last step is personal preference, but I think it looks nice and helps to hide the spine binding. I'm taking the first and last sheets of paper and gluing them down to the cover. To keep moisture from getting into the pages, I clip wax paper down to them. Then I take some Modge Podge and apply it to the first and last pages. You can weight the book down again and wait for the glue to dry. Then that's it. You have your very own Winter Soldier journal. Thanks for joining me for yet another prop tutorial. Remember, if you liked this video, click the like button, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe.